Hey guys, as I told you on Monday, I was planning to do a video on how social media can affect tennis players of all levels. I think it's an interesting subject and deserves a video to itself. But I'm not going to make this video today. I'm going to hold off on it. But I'm going to make a video that's somewhat related to that topic. And I'm wondering how Jannik Sinner will deal with the backlash. So looking back at Sinner's year, some of the results that he's had are starting to make more sense to me. And if you remember, Sinner was playing incredible tennis, starting in Davis Cup last year. And then, of course, he won the Australian Open, won Rotterdam. He didn't play at the top of his level in Indian Wells. That's where he tested positive. But then went on to Miami and played maybe some of the best tennis that I've ever seen him play. He beat Medvedev 2-1 in the semis and beat Dimitrov 1-3 in the final. Now, of course, haters are going to say he was doped out of his mind and that's why he won Miami. But the levels of the banned substance in Sinner's system were so low that his performance couldn't possibly have improved from it. So it wasn't just the Miami tournament. Sinner, up to that point, was on absolute fire and was clearly the best player in the world. And then 4 days after winning Miami, Sinner was notified that he tested positive, and I cannot imagine what that feels like. His whole world fell apart at that moment, and guess what? He did play well after knowing that he tested positive, but it wasn't at the same level as in the beginning of the year. He lost to Tsitsipas in Monte Carlo, he pulled out of Madrid, and he lost that semifinal match at the French Open to Alcaraz, where I thought that Sinner played well in that tournament, but he wasn't at his absolute best level or at the level that he was at earlier that year. He then won Halle, but I didn't think he played his best tennis there. He had a lot of tough 3-set battles. Then, of course, in Wimbledon, he wasn't feeling well and lost to Medvedev in the quarters. He then lost to Rublev in the quarters of Montreal, and he won Cincinnati last week. So apart from Cincinnati, where he played well and won the title, knowing that the news about the positive test were going to come out on Monday, this is something that's super interesting to me, and I'm going to take that into consideration somewhat when I make my predictions for my favorites for the US Open title. It is clear that Jannik suffered a lot with having this in the back of his mind. But what's happening now is 1,000 times worse because he's being absolutely destroyed all over social media, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Reddit, whether it's actual comments underneath newspaper articles. Sinner and tennis in general is getting a bad reputation. Now the big question is, will this go away for Jannik Sinner, or will this stay with him for a while? It's hard to predict. I do think it's going to fade, but in the immediate future, this is all people are going to talk about every time Sinner steps on the court, and it's going to be interesting what Sinner has to say in his press conference tomorrow. But my hope is that this goes away for Sinner, because a lot of people that are bashing Sinner simply don't have the facts right. So let's first talk about the ATP or the ITF's involvement. And people have to realize that this entire matter happened outside the jurisdiction of the ATP or the ITF. The ATP or the ITF is not involved in these matters by design. There's a lot of talk about unfair treatment and the fact that high-profile players get an advantage over other players. Every case is completely different, and there's going to be a different outcome because of it. The fact that someone like Sharapova or Halep were suspended for longer because it was more difficult for them to prove their innocence. Sinner was very quickly able to prove his innocence, and this is why this matter was able to get resolved so quickly. So it's not necessarily the case where high-profile players have an advantage over low-profile players, because you can see discrepancies in Sharapova's case or Halep's case to Sinner's case. Now, a lot of people are also saying that the higher-ranked players, the superstars, have an advantage over lower-ranked players, and there is some evidence to suggest some discrepancies there. However, there was a player ranked 350 named Bortolotti who also tested positive for close to ball, and his case was resolved in pretty much the same speed as Sinner's. Now, to be fair, in the latest New York Times article about this case, there were more Italian players who tested positive for close-to-ball. Paoletti and Tamaro, 17-year-olds at the time, tested positive for close-to-ball in 2021. The same process was followed. Mandatory provisional suspension, appeal, investigation, explanation. Paoletti was found to have no fault or negligence, but Tamaro was banned for 2 years. Different cases had different outcomes. I'm going to go through the case one more time because there's a lot of confusion what actually happened and how Sinner ended up getting this substance into his system. So Naldi, that is Sinner's physiotherapist. That's the guy that massages Sinner and puts his tape on his ankles and so on. He was grabbing something out of his bag and cut his finger on a scalpel. Now, if this ever happened to you, you know that it takes a while for the finger to heal, number one, and it's very uncomfortable. So it is perfectly plausible that Naldi was looking for some kind of treatment. Now, a lot of people, including some former players, are calling what Naldi applied to his finger a cream. It was not a cream. Just think of the absurdity of Naldi applying a cream to his finger and then going on to massage Sinner. That is not what happened. Naldi applied a spray to his finger. Now, some of you guys might not be familiar with a spray like this, but I am because I grew up in Germany and we used sprays like this. So if you would fall on the court and scuff your knee and start, you can apply a spray that would, number one, stop the bleeding, but also add a protective film over the wound. Now, I did some research and I found out through a German doping expert that the sprays that are available for purchase in Germany do not contain any banned substances, including close-to-ball. However, in Italy, this type of spray does contain the banned substance close-to-ball. And this is what Naldi sprayed himself with. Now, a lot of people are wondering why Naldi didn't use gloves, but as you know, massages are carried out without gloves. In fact, it's weird to get a massage with gloves. But of course, it would have made a lot of sense for Naldi to put on gloves after spraying himself with this medicine. The one thing that's weird to me about this whole story is Ferrara, who is Sinner's fitness coach. And Ferrara, believe it or not, Ferrara had this medicine on him for personal use, and it is Ferrara who gave Naldi the spray for his finger. And that to me makes absolutely no sense. Why would Ferrara, who is in charge of Jannik Sinner's fitness, be so careless to give a spray bottle containing a banned substance to Naldi, who's going to spray it onto his finger and then go on to massage Sinner? That is extremely reckless. Now, to top it all off, and I don't know if this is true or not, I've seen pictures of this medicine that has a huge warning label on the package that says doping with a big red circle and a line through it. So while I do believe that this entire thing was an accident, and Sinner, of course, had no knowledge of any of this, and the fact that the levels were so low and couldn't have possibly enhanced his performance on the court, the story checks out. But it is still weird to me that someone could be so reckless. Forget giving the spray to the physio, even having a banned substance in his possession is too much of a risk, and that one detail of the story makes absolutely no sense to me. One thing I'm hoping for is that after Sinner's press conference that we get a break from this story, because the entire US Open is being overshadowed by this, and I was so looking forward to the US Open. I think there's so many great storylines. How will Alcaraz play after that tough defeat to Djokovic at the Olympics? How will Djokovic play? Will he be on the top of his game? And I actually had high hopes for Sinner. I was very impressed in the way he played in Cincinnati, but now with this whole thing going on, I'm going to have to think long and hard to see how I'm going to predict how Sinner will do at this year's US Open.